Welcome to Evilive, the live commentary show that answers the question, are idle hands truly the devil's playground? Now, subscribe if you're new to the channel, because today we are reacting to the not-so-new San Diego Comic-Con footage, the Rings of Power trailer. Now, this series is set thousands of years before the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. It is based on author J.R.R. Tolkien's history of Middle-earth, and it begins during a time of relative peace and covers all of the major events of Middle-earth's Second Age. The forging of the Rings of Power, the rise of the Dark Lord Sauron, the fall of the island kingdom of Numenor, and the last alliance between elves and men. So let's take a look at this and have a conversation afterward, and maybe, go over the controversy surrounding some of this stuff. Here we go.
We thought the war, at last,
That's a big pile of
was
stone.
ended.
Today,
I have not, as of
our
yet,
days
been
of
impressed
peace
by Amazon Prime's
begin.
footage.
We thought our joys would be unending. We thought our light would never dim.
The skies are strange.
Those are the precursors to the Hobbits.
You just hear Galadriel, the moment we feared.
Evil does not sleep.
This looks a lot better.
It waits.
Beyond the darkness, tempting shadow, to bury us all beneath the mountain.
He has not one name, but many.
Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of Sauron?
If the evil rising is left unchecked, it will take us all. Find the light, and the shadow will not find you.
Together we can survive this!
Well,
Fight with me.
Each of us must decide who we shall be.
There can be no trust between hammer and rock. Eventually, one or the other must surely break.
You have been told many lies of Middle-earth.
all right, look. I think that looks pretty good. I know there's a bunch of people freaking out about the Balrog at the end, as if it has to be Durin's Bane. There were other Balrogs out there. And we have to remember, and, I am no Tolkien professor by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just going to let this run again in the background with the audio potted down here. You got to remember that, like, the Balrogs and Sauron, they're the same thing. Like, they're referenced as, like, angels. The Balrog were corrupted by Morgoth. And, but other than that, I believe they're the exact same, like, entities. Just shaped differently through the corruption. This is the best looking of the trailers that they've released. I mean, they've had teasers before this one. But I really, really do think this, the production value of this trailer in particular looks a lot better. So a lot of the problems that I've heard online about this from fans, which, if we're going to be 100% honest, fans are probably the worst people to listen to because they're way too close to the material. Anytime you're talking about adaptations from literature to the silver screen, you have to realize that concessions must be made. They must be made for a plethora of reasons. First of all, this wouldn't be made if it wasn't intended to make money, meaning it has to appeal to the widest audience possible, not just the super, super narrow Tolkien freaking nerds. Like, let's be honest. I'm counting myself among those, by the way. But again, I'm not like an obsessive about Tolkien. You know, it's not even my first fantasy love, to be honest. I am excited about this, however. You know, when we're reflecting on the sort of adaptations of Tolkien's work to either television or the silver screen, what we're really talking about is Rankle Bass animation TV version of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, which wasn't great. I mean, it was, the 70s was the era, but it wasn't great. And then there was the Peter Jackson adaptations of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which had this really wonderful extended version, in my opinion. I really, really enjoyed that, but it also was flawed. And then we had The Hobbit, what ended up being trilogy by Jackson, and it was really, really flawed. Though for what it was, I did enjoy it. So for fans to take those flawed IP adaptations and then apply it to this one, saying, well, this one is so much worse. Well, first of all, you haven't seen it, so you're complaining about possibilities, which is literally nothing. And second of all, if all of the other ones were flawed and we still reflect fondly on them, why would this one be any different at all? Anyway, so I'm going to play this again here. So it always kind of blew my mind that people are are actively right now just pushing for this to fail. It really reminds me of the Star Wars fan base that I'm a part of. I mean, I have a YouTube channel about it and all, where they won't even watch anything that has ever been made after the sequel trilogy by Disney and Lucasfilms because they didn't like it. And that's fine. Like, do whatever you want to do. But trolling the internet over other people who want to watch it and critically analyze the content, that's your life now? Like, how pathetic of a life do you have? Like, that's all you do is just troll other people? That's what I see online with Tolkien fans. They're just trolling those who want to go into this with an open mind. And I'm sure I'll get a little bit here if anyone ever pays attention to this new channel. And ultimately, what is it that you want? Do you want them to make other Lord of the Rings shows, maybe closer to the adaptations of the actual literature than possibly this one would be? And if so, then it's got to make money. Remember, these IPs are not made into films for you, the fans. We want to think that they are because we're the fans. But the truth is they're made by corporations to turn a massive profit. That's the only reason. And again, so they have to reach the widest audience. All right, so let's talk about this film, or this series specifically. This first season, I believe, is going to be centered around the creation of the Rings of Power. I believe. Again, it's not out yet. And the synopsis that I provided at the very beginning of this trailer reaction are really just what Amazon Prime has given us. And I think it's the promise of multiple seasons of this show where we can talk about those 4 different events of the forging of the Rings of Power, the rise of the Dark Lord Sauron, the fall of the island kingdom of Numenor, and the last alliance between elves and men. So, and again, I don't really know a lot about, like, I've never read the Silmarillion. I'm just a fan of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. And so coming into this, I'm a lot less attached to it as some other fans may be who are obsessive Tolkien people. But again, this wasn't, it's inspired by the appendix of the Lord of the Rings. And they reference that because J.R.R. Tolkien did not flesh out everything. He did an amazing job, but his whole goal was to create something that would endure through time. right? And that other people could contribute to and work with. So this series is created by J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay primarily, and they are massive Tolkien fans. So they're not going into this trying to screw over Tolkien fans. They're going into it trying to tell a Tolkien story set in the Second Age, which is not completely fleshed out. It's just got massive story beats, and some of the events are fleshed out really well, but not everything. So there has to be some creative interpretation involved. That's, I think, at the heart of where real Tolkien fans, obsessives, are having issue with this. So this is, again, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's History of Middle-earth. The music, I thought, was fantastic. It was just really cinematic and beautiful. It was composed primarily by Bear McCreary. It covers all the major events, as mentioned before. It is scheduled to premiere on Prime Video September 2nd, so very soon, in about a month, in 2022. It started working in July 2019. And Shippey states that they believe the first season of the series was supposed to consist of 20 episodes. So whether in 2019, 20 episodes ends up maintaining to 2022 when they're releasing it, who knows? But even if these are only half-hour episodes, which I'm hoping they're not, you know, when we're talking about cinematic scope in terms of films or series, you know, your hour benchmark is probably ideal. And I think what they really need to be doing is looking less at the Wheel of Time series, because and more to the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, because those were really wonderful high fantasy. Well, I don't know about high fantasy, but those were really wonderful fantasy seasons where, you know, they dove in really in depth into the material, the literature that it was inspired from, and they took their time with the story, you know, with these wonderful hour-long episodes to allow the viewer to really fall into that world. And that's what I want to see out of the Rings of Power. I want to be transported from my living room couch to Middle-earth, and I want to really be immersed in this epic story. Because let's be honest, none of us have seen it. You know, you've seen it in your head, maybe, as you've read some of the Silmarillion or some of the appendix in The Lord of the Rings, but that's kind of it. And so to see it reimagined on the live screen, it may not be perfect, but I'm okay with imperfect. It may not be, you know, the ideal, perfect, or faithful adaptation from the story. But let's be honest, I would infinitely prefer great actors that tell a great story from a great script than trying to capture word for word on a page. You can't do that in series or film. It's never done, because the medium is so different that you have to make concessions. In some cases, characters are combined or wholly made up in order to add context to the greater story that is told in a visual narrative rather than a literary one. You have to condense events in some cases, you know, specifically in film cases, and, you know, make concessions in those ways where the story is truncated. The minutia of the story has to be taken in the spirit of rather than to the letter of. And there's dramatic differences between those two. So as fans, as grown-ass adults, we should understand that anytime you take a literature and you put it into a literal script format, that changes are made. That's just necessity. So that's why I don't take it so personally, or I don't take so much umbrage to the freedom that screenwriters and producers take, because they have to take those freedoms. And Tolkien left it pretty open. Now, I understand that a lot of people have issue with, you know, there's different ethnicities representing the characters, whether they're human, dwarven, or elven. And I have to remind you all, they're actors. They're actors. Like, you have to get that through your head. Throughout history, actors have portrayed characters that are different from them. So, for example, men would play women. That doesn't mean they're literally saying that they're women. It's fantasy. It's made up. It's a portrayal of a story, right? In Shakespeare's time, this happened all the time. In ancient Japanese plays, this happened all the time. So just throwing, you have non-disabled actors playing disabled actors. It's acting. Like, that's a normal thing. So to say that you can't have a Latin or an African or a European or a native peoples portraying an elf or a dwarf or a human simply because you want to see just white people because it was inspired by World War II era, or I'm sorry, World War I era Europe. Well, tough shit. Like, that's life. Life is not all white people. I'm sorry, that's just not the reality of it. Not in Tolkien's time at all, and not in our time. So to then expect that they would only use white actors to portray these different types of characters is bordering on racist, because it's not reality, not in the story and not in life. And everyone says, well, J.R.R. Tolkien created all this stuff, and so if he created them as white people, then they should be white people. Well, let's keep in mind that he based this off of World War I and Europe. Now, there was colonization and traveling all around. I mean, the British were the worst when it came to different cultures and different ethnicities, even, including enslaving and segregating. So much worse than Americans everywhere. So when we reflect back on his time, we need to remember it was a time of, war, global war, including global cultures, meaning different ethnicities, period. So any fans that get so riled up about this stuff are just not thinking of this in terms of who the inspirations for Tolkien were, what the situation in the world was, and then how we now are going to interpret it. I know people are really upset about what they refer to as woke agendas in corporations and cancel culture in society. And I am bothered by both of those things in some degree as well. But I don't take it personally because I'm not a prick. If you don't want to be an asshole, you can just say, well, that's what other people are doing. It doesn't affect my personal life. I'm just going to move on and ignore it. It affects films being made because, again, going back, I've already said it twice, 3 times a charm. This is meant to make money and appeal to the broadest audience. That's it. And so they're probably going to share a myriad of gender identities, sexual identities, lifestyles, and ethnicities, because that reflects the world that we live in and the talent pool that they have to draw from. Now, they're not going to probably ham-fist it into the story because that's just not reality. And anyone who says that they are is talking out of their ass because it's not out yet. You haven't seen it, so you don't know. So all we have to do is base on the literature that this is inspired by, or an adaptation from, the trailers that we've seen, and the culture that we currently exist in. Now, you can, shake your fist at the heavens and be upset about that culture all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that that's where we are. And so, of course, the stories that come out of the period of time will reflect that period of time. That's why in Tolkien's era, when he wrote this literature, it reflected his period of time. And so for those of you saying, yeah, but that's why we need to latch on to that period of time and bring it forward and, reflect the series or the story in that light, well, you're just not going to see that nowadays. You just will not. Our current culture demands that it reflects whatever story is being told in this time. In the same way that people rail against how, you see this with a lot with those sort of fanatical liberals and the woke culture trying to cancel past stories because they reflected the period of the time that they were created in. I think that's wrong too. Like, if you're going to create a story, You cannot then in the future argue that it doesn't fit your current sensibilities because it wasn't built with your current sensibilities. And equally, you cannot say that we have to create a story with past sensibilities because we're no longer with those past sensibilities. So everyone trying to cancel this series based on their own preconceived notion of how woke it may or may not be, or inclusive it may or may not be, is doing the exact same thing as any radical liberal trying to cancel past history's content. And both of those groups are going to be arguing that they're each doing the same exact thing, just in different directions. So how about instead, we take this series on face value for what it may end up being, and either enjoy it or do not and move on. But again, people need to make money, not just corporations, individuals doing channels like this, and they make infinitely more money, get infinitely more views, likes, and clicks because of controversy and shaking your fist at the heavens and saying how upset you are about something. And so you're going to see an endless stream of Lord of the Rings channels popping up, or the existing ones just railing against this series. And they're going to be popular and they're going to make money because of that, because it's so much easier to bitch about something than it is to actually do something. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this. I thought the trailer looked great. I'm looking forward to the story. If it doesn't meet all of my expectations, I can't really complain because I didn't make it. You know, if you want to complain about this, make one of your own. But then that would take effort more than just screaming into a can, and most people don't have that much ambition. All right, well, thank you so much for tuning in, and like it or not, evil spelled backwards is live. So, let's continue living, people. Thanks for tuning in.